processes to assess that risk.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Mills from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor. I really appreciate you waving me on. You see, unlike a lot of the members of Congress, I don't use a boilerplate photo of the chaos that had assumed all of Afghanistan. The actual photo behind me actually comes from my own personal photos, because during my campaign, I actually paused to go over and rescue a mother and 3 children with our team conducting the very first successful overland rescue after this botched withdrawal. You see, I spent over 7 years of my life in Iraq, 3 years in Afghanistan. I'm intimately familiar with not only the work that the IG does, but also of the mistakes that happen when you put political optics over military strategy. Now, I'll start with you, Mr. Storch. In seeing that there was a drastic increase in veteran suicides from 22 a day to 25 a day after this botched withdrawal, would you feel confident in saying that this botched withdrawal contributed to the increase in suicide and deaths of our veteran service members who served abroad?
Well, thank you for the question, first of all, and thank you very much for your service. This is an incredibly serious issue, obviously, and one that our office has taken seriously for a long time. We've done a good body of work on mental health issues, and particularly in the area you're speaking about. One of my deputy inspector generals testified here before SASC last year, I believe, about it. I don't know, honestly, whether I have enough, sort of information to make the causal link that you're saying definitively, but, sort of generally what you're saying certainly is, makes sense. And so that's probably the best I can do.
Understood, again. And I appreciate that. And I'm sure the family of Master Sergeant Chadwick Paul, who was a good teammate of mine who took his own life, would feel the same way.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, sir.
Ms. Shaw, would you agree that State Department cables are not protected by executive privilege if they are not directly being sent to the President themselves or the executive branch?
Thank you for that question. It's actually not an issue that I've considered. It wasn't an issue in the course of our work, so I'm not sure I have an answer for you on that.
Well, the reason I asked that is that there was a cable that was sent by the United States State Department that it was known as the 23 Diplomat Descent Cable, that talked about the fact that the political optics that was being placed above military strategy was actually endangering the mission as a whole. Now, I found it really interesting that not only are we having to subpoena those cables, which are not protected by executive privileges being blocked, but I heard from Mr. Sopko that the State Department and the USAID is also not wanting to cooperate. Mr. Sopko, I know you've said it many times, and I'll make it really quickly. Was there a tremendous amount of obstruction that was being placed to try and get information by USAID and state?
Obstruction of for against us? Yes, yes.
And is there any mystery to the fact that even as far back as 2011, during the original SIGAR, you started having things where they were talking about billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse that was utilized by things like the Kandahar Helmand Power Project, by things like the ASI, Afghan Stabilization Initiative, South, Northwest, and East. The fact that the implementing partners who were there on the ground at the time couldn't even stop the corruption and fraud that was going on, and now we think that not having Americans on the ground is going to somehow make our corruption more under control or worse? What would you say, Ms. And I'm sorry, I don't want to butcher your name.
Angarella. Yeah, I appreciate the question. Not having eyes on the ground makes oversight much less effective and more complicated.
I think that's a polite way of stating it. And as someone who had spent a tremendous amount of time in Afghanistan, especially understanding the significant importance of Bagram, and knowing that it had the ability for us to not only shelter and provide the force protection that could have prevented the 13 brave heroes and the 13 new Gold Star families from losing their lives, but also give us the opportunity to be able to do proper vetting, which you talked about the thousands that were put on the plane, which were actually prioritized above Americans and above P2 and SIVs that were just randomly being thrown on Great Tail aircraft. But my question is that would you feel that if we were able to have had Bagram Air Base to be able to do proper vetting and manifesting without the chaos before they went onto the plane, that that could have contributed to potentially making sure that we did this more effectively? I'll start with you, Ms. Shaw.
Thanks for that question. So we haven't considered that question squarely. Bagram was a DoD facility, and so I would invite IG Storch to weigh in. But
understood, Ms. Shaw, understood. But the reason I ask you is because it was something that was very strange from my understanding when I saw the State Department taking operational control over the Department of Defense when it came to what planes were flying and flying out. The reason I know this is because I was on a plane that was a November tail number, which is an American aircraft designated as a humanitarian aircraft to rescue 28 Americans with 20 special operations operators on there with 5 PPR approvals that was continually being denied on approach when we're already hovering above Afghanistan by the State Department, not to mention the coordination to have an F-16 do a flyover for intimidations and the threats of being shot down as an American aircraft there to save Americans. These are the types of answers that people need to get an answer to. The 13 Gold Star families, why they're dead. The Americans that were left behind. The billions of dollars to supply a nation that I fought in to stop from being a safe haven of terror that you've actually permitted through failed administrations to be a safe haven of terror. Okay. I want the response. I want these reactions. I want IG to do a better job. And I want accountability for those who are actually left behind and those who died. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired.